Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of the Orbit Extra, the show that's going to put you in the driving seat with live and immediate reaction to the very latest episode of the Orbit. I'm your host, Natalie Bromley, and I'll be joined this evening with two very special guests who will be discussing with you their thoughts on that fantastic episode of the Orbit that we have just watched, especially for International Women's Day. Now, before we kick off, let's make this all about you. Let's put you in the driving seat. You will see, as you're watching this, the comments box. Get your questions in there. Get your immediate reaction to the show. Get whatever topics you want our panel to discuss. We'll be keeping an eye on that throughout the show, and we'll be picking them out to put them to our panel. Now, very shortly, we're going to be welcoming to the show the very wonderful Cara Scott. But before we do that, I'm going to introduce the main man himself, the host of The Orbit, Robbie Strazynski. Robbie, welcome to The Orbit Extra and the opposite side of the microphone this evening.
Hey, Natalie, it's good to speak with you. That was such a great episode. You know, it's funny when you're just hosting it, you're focusing so much on the hosting. And now here's an opportunity I get to share my own thoughts, some reactions to some of what the panelists said. And it's good to see. It's good to discuss this on International Women's Day.
Definitely. I'm really excited about this new format because it just gives us a very organic and a very instant look at what we've just seen in the realm of how we feel and that immediate reaction. Very quickly before we bring Cara in then, what was your takeaway from the show? How did it feel to be a part of that fantastic panel?
It felt like a privilege. I have to be honest with you. It's always a little bit tricky for someone who's not female, not a woman, to be doing any sort of participation on something which is for International Women's Day. And the fact that all four of the panelists very kindly accepted the invitation to appear on such a show, they made me part of the conversation as well. It really did feel like a privilege. For a very long time, you know, in what I've done in my poker media career, I've tried hard to be an ally to women in poker. It's something that is mirrored in my general daily life to women in general. And I felt, again, just very honored, privileged to be able to put a show like this together with my co-producers. Shout out to Lee and Des. And I'm happy to be doing this now with you and with Cara, and to bring some positivity and shine that spotlight, as the panelists had said, on women today and hopefully 364 days a year as well.
Oh, absolutely. Well, let's not wait any longer. Let's bring in our main, very special guest this evening. She is, of course, an 888 brand ambassador. She's an ESPN anchor and WSOP sideline. She is an advocate of women in general and a fantastic poker player herself. Cara Scott, we are absolutely honored to have you on the Orbit Extra, and thank you so much for supporting us.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Really happy to be here. It was fantastic to watch that show and see those panelists, all of them experts in what they do. They know poker so well. So yeah, thanks for having me on.
Oh, you're very welcome. I mean, it's a topic that's been rumbling on forever. I mean, we've all been in poker a long time now. I remember when I started playing back in 2009, the question was still being asked back then, where are all the women? How do we get more women to play? How do we increase the numbers? And I think for me, the overall takeaway from that show was that it feels like all these years later, we're still asking the same question and we've not necessarily found the answer. So I guess from a general kickoff from your perspective, Cara, when you speak to women in the industry, in the game, what are they telling you? What do we do about this?
To be honest, I would be exactly in your position as well. I've been in the industry since 2005, and I've been speaking to women in poker. I just want to make sure before I answer, actually, you guys can hear me fine.
Yeah, we can. Yeah,
okay, perfect. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Just to make sure. But yeah, so every time I speak to women in poker about being women in poker, there's a sense of exhaustion at having to discuss that same topic over and over again instead of discussing poker results and the industry as a wider whole. And some of the things that Yvonne said in that show, and then also Rebecca when she talked about becoming a mother and understanding a wider demographic of women, I think is really important to say. We're obviously not at all experts on women in poker in general. because we are all, I mean, if you look at women in poker, they are all ages, and we don't really represent that. We don't represent the retired women, of whom there are a ton, and we're not going to be able to understand where they're coming from and some of their needs. So we need to be listening. And also, women of color who are dealing with intersections of identity that we're not going to be able to understand. So we need to be listening, I think, a lot more to those women to understand how to move forward in a wider general sense.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think as a generation, we are asking questions more forcefully, and we are opening dialogue, and we're not necessarily accepting decisions or ways that things have been done before us. We want to facilitate that change. I think one of the things that I took away, Cara, from the show was, I think it was Yvonne's comment when she said the key to this is listening.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether or not we're asking the right questions, rather than sort of the question being, how do we get more women into the game? I wonder whether the question should be, rather than getting the numbers either equal or getting, I mean, we're not going to get a 50-50 split. I think we very much covered that in the show. But is the question, therefore, how do we make that transition easier for women, for those who want to join the game, rather than how do we concentrate on getting the volume in?
Right. Or even how do we retain them? I mean, there are a lot of areas in science and technology where they keep talking about, especially on International Women's Day, how do we get more women to get into programming, to get into science fields, to get into this or that? And in a lot of those fields, it's been shown that women are getting into them, but there's a bottleneck. They're not progressing forward, or they're leaving. Why are we not retaining women? And if you look at the numbers online versus the numbers live, what are we not doing right in terms of live poker that's not translating to the live tables? Because it's not. It absolutely is not. And I think that's the question we need to be asking. It could be but it could be largely societal. I think a lot of it does have to do with environment. I think Yvonne was talking about training and education and helping women feel more comfortable at the tables. I think those are all important as well. But societally, there are a lot of other factors at play, and poker is not the only industry that has this problem. That's not to say we shouldn't fix it. I mean,
No,
I completely, we should fix it, and we should focus on that. But there's a lot at play here.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the women that I talk to, I think there's a common theme here, and I think it was Rebecca who touched on this in the main show. Women have got a lot of demands on their time, and just because something feels stereotypical to highlight doesn't necessarily mean that it's not true. And women, generally speaking, have got family commitments, they have childcare issues, they have obviously balancing sometimes careers and childcare. And there is a balance there, I think, between poker offering a working from home flexible income stream, but one that's very, very hard to market from a regulatory perspective, as opposed to being able to say to people, well, look, you can take a Saturday out and go and spend 14 hours in a casino and play poker. And to most women, they go, are you what? I'm not going to spend a whole Saturday spending 14 hours. So I wonder whether there is an opportunity here for us, Cara, to promote online poker as an outlet to get women into live poker, because it does give a quicker return. They can play in flexible hours. And I feel kind of surprised that I guess online sites don't do more to promote female poker, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's very true. Before we came on here, I wanted to check some numbers. So I went on the UN Women's website, and they were talking about how the pandemic has affected women. And pre-pandemic, women domestically were doing nearly 3 times as much labor domestically as men in the home. And that's unpaid labor. And that's a lot. And it's actually gotten worse because of the pandemic. So I mean, in terms of demands on their time, this is something that does need to be looked at. And that's part of the societal problem that kind of underpins this, where, who is responsible for watching the kids on the weekend? If someone wants to go out and play a big, long tournament somewhere, like you say, that's just not always going to be feasible for a primary parent. And generally the primary parent is, unfortunately, I mean, for both men and women, unfortunately, it tends to be women. So I think online poker is a really great outlet for that. And I think that women are having a lot of different games kind of fighting for their attention and money as well. Because unfortunately, wage gap, and during the pandemic, not post the pandemic, during the pandemic, that's actually gotten worse. So
Yeah,
that's part of it. That's part of it. Maybe, like Yvonne was saying, satellites is such an important part of it, not just to get, women live sitting down and feeling comfortable, but also making it more affordable to play tournaments. And so it doesn't feel like such a big chunk of a budget, I suppose.
Yeah, I think that's really true. There's a couple of points in that. You're absolutely right. This isn't just a problem in poker field. I mean, for those who don't know me as yet, I very much operate in a corporate legal environment, and we have this challenge all the time. Law firms every single year they've got to publish their gender pay gap, and every single year there is one.
Right.
And it's disheartening every single year. I want to link this in actually to our first comment in the chat box. Donna Morton, who put in our chat box earlier on while she was watching episode 9, she said one of the problems is she feels a lot of women feel afraid to post small wins. They see the professionals winning big and they think they need to compare to them. And Tina Stafford actually replied to that and said, yes, I'm one of them. Robbie, a quick input from you, actually, I guess, from a male perspective. Is this a gender thing, or is this maybe a personality thing? Your fellow friends, and you're a man yourself playing in this field, would you feel embarrassed or concerned with posting big, small wins? Is that something that would happen?
Not at all, because big and small are relative terms. If I'm playing in a 1-2 or a 2-5 game in Las Vegas, that's already quite, a lot bigger than what I play in my home games here in Israel. And, if I'm winning $500, for me, that's a gigantic win. I'm talking about cash games. I don't normally play tournaments. The biggest tournament I entered one time, a World Series of Poker bracelet event, the $1,500 dealer's choice. That was the one time I ever did it. But besides that, I think I paid 200 euros once to enter a tournament, and mostly significantly smaller than that. I mean, we see on Twitter, on Facebook so often, massive piles of chips. We see, okay, going to go ahead and take my shot in the 5K and the 10K. I don't use the word K. I say 1,000. That's a lot of money for someone like me. And the thing is, those are the vocal ones. Those are the professionals. That's what we see. And again, like you said, from the male perspective, 98% of the people who play poker are not playing poker for these crazy high stakes. So if anything, I know I've posted big wins, of $400 or $500, or, we use Israeli shekels here, 1,000 shekels. I took everybody's money at the table, which is like $300. That's a very big win for me in my home game. And that's certainly something to be proud of. And I would say men and women should not feel afraid to post a win like that. If anything, if you're a true poker fan, if you're a true ally of women in poker or a woman in poker, you support something like that.
Yeah, and I think that is something that Divers Flip Group has very much brought to the table. And that's something I was really pleased to see her highlight on the panel as well, because not all female communities and not all female initiatives over the past few years have been successful in trying to drive a female community, but Divers managed to tap into a market that was ready for change and wanted to be done that. And, we get posts every single day, Diver posts in our Flip group, when somebody's won, and it can be a $50 win, it can be a $500,000 win, and every single one of them is championed in exactly the same way, and every single one of them gets comments and claps and support and people saying well done. And I think that's a really important step, Cara, to make women feel that they are in a supportive environment that's going to champion those successes.
I agree. I think community is incredibly important. We want to be able to see people, women who look like us, that could be us, doing things in poker, whether they're small or big. We're not all going to be Maria Ho, She's amazing. She's absolutely incredible. But for a lot of us, we don't play professionally. I don't play professionally anymore to the extent that I did. I play for entertainment because I love the game and because I work in the game. Of course, I'm still always going to play, but I'm not going to be able to post those great big wins like Robbie said. So I think we should be, celebrating that within the community. And I'm really grateful for communities like Divas that do that give women a place to talk to each other about it as well, in case they have issues about something, or to have that backup, what the WhatsApp group or the, Facebook group, where people are kind of railing along with you through a tournament that is maybe bigger than you're used to playing. That's the kind of thing that people want to get out of poker. I think when you're a recreational player, you want that feeling of like the possibility and the excitement.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as women, that's not necessarily something that sits within our comfort zone. We tend to be a little shyer sometimes when compliments come our way or when the opportunities arrive. You kind of step back a little bit, and there's a natural gender reluctance, I think, sometimes to put yourself in the spotlight. And gosh, that like we said, the sooner we can just champion our successes, the better. Robbie, how did you react to, forgive me, I think this was Yvonne's comment, and this links very much to this community aspect, that having that supportive group and championing those successes links to the training and mentoring within female game and how I guess you must be familiar with this. I mean, did you get into poker just, like buddies playing home games and Friday night beer with the lads and poker games? That's not necessarily something that female groups of friends have as their grassroots entry into poker. And I found that super interesting to see the difference of how, I guess, men would start that as opposed to women.
Yeah, that is something that, kind of was eye-opening. Again, when you're sitting in the host seat and seeing, 4 women, I don't, quite frankly, I've had occasionally, on the once in a blue moon, a woman who has joined our home game. It's a bunch of guys. When I learned, I want to say about 8 years old. It was around the kitchen table. It was from my dad and from my grandpa. And my dad had his regular home game. It was all the guys. They used to make little jokes of like, okay, the one single guy, it was my cousin. He was the one who would write down all the wins and losses so that nobody's wives would see who won or who lost how much, because he was the single one. He could get away with it. I have heard that, also more than a decade in the industry from so many people, guys, that's how they got in. My dad taught me, right?
Yeah.
Far less I've heard that from women, that they saw their mother or that they saw their father. It's often, a boyfriend, or I saw it on TV. I'm hearing that a lot more. I don't necessarily know that there's a right or a wrong, though. And I do kind of want to bridge into this idea. I don't necessarily think that we should call it a problem in need of a solution. I think the wording matters a lot. It is an issue. It's important to discuss. It's important to say, well, if we want more people, more women in the game, how do we, push that agenda? But I don't necessarily consider it to be a problem in that respect. Kara, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that women are socialized to not be as aggressive and therefore not to celebrate wins in an aggressive arena. And poker is an aggressive arena. It's very competitive. And so we're not really socialized to toot our own horns and say, we did this and we did that. And I can see what Yvonne is saying about providing that same atmosphere and that same chance really for women to get their feet wet with poker by sitting down in something that feels more like a home game. Because, I was really lucky. I actually did learn from grandparents when I was a little kid. I learned how to play a draw poker game. I didn't learn Texas Hold'em, obviously, but I had that, and I'm really grateful I did, because when I came back into poker as an adult, I had that behind me. I understood what it was like to sit down, and I'd always played cards. So yeah, providing that atmosphere, I think, is great. And it really took me aback when she said that too, because I'd never looked at it in that way. And I think she has a really astute way of looking at these issues, and I appreciated a lot of what she said.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving over slightly to the chat box, just so we can have a look at some of the comments that we've got in already. Maureen, is it Bloschlinger? I apologize profusely if that is a terrible pronunciation of your surname. But Maureen...
I'm going to try it again. I think it's Blocklinger.
Blocklinger. There you go.
I think it's Blocklinger.
Blocklinger. Yeah. Thank you, Robbie. To the rescue. Maureen has just put in the chat box, just found this chat box, great content. Well, that's a fantastically well-timed prompt there, Maureen. There is a chat box there, guys. Shout out to some of the people that we've got watching the show. We have, of course, got Maureen and Donna Morton, who we've heard from so far. Dara O'Kearney and David Lappin are both in the chat box. Hi, guys. David, thank you very much for the shout out on your show last night, by the way. That was very much appreciated. We've also got, who else have we got in here? Maureen and Donna are being very active, and we love this. Tristan Chaplin's in the chat box, as is, oh my goodness, I'm scrolling. And David, oh gosh, there's lots. Let's go back. Let's start. Go on, Robbie.
Oh, I saw Jennifer Newell, great poker writer. Shout out to her as well. She had a comment during the show as well.
Nice.
Brilliant. And Maureen's got some great comments for you, Robbie. She says, yes, Robbie's very supportive of the women and took on some great ideas. So there you go. One for Robbie there for you. Just a quick reminder, guys, if you do have some questions, do pop them in the chat box. Moving back to Donna again, who's posted a second question. I'm just going to work through these in timeline order, guys, so we will get through to all of them. Donna says that the older ladies have got more spare time on their hands and have more liquidity than the younger demographic. That's quite an interesting point on that, Cara. That maybe when, I guess that goes back to our family commitments, doesn't it?
Yeah, I caught just the end of that, unfortunately, because my internet goes in and out here in Italy. But it's actually a comment that I've heard a lot. And it's something I think is incredibly valid. And it speaks to why are we not marketing more to women who are sort of retirement age or have that kind of extra money in their pocket and extra time because they're not, actively raising children at that moment. And I have friends and I had friends who were in a generation older than me. And I'm a generation older than most of the women in poker that are kind of my peers. So the generation older than me would say that it feels terrible to kind of be ignored by the media as well. And I think when we talk about which women do we need to be highlighting, I think a lot of the time it's going to be women who are not the ones that are already in the spotlight. We need to be showing a wider demographic of women in terms of age, life experience, and race as well.
Yeah, that's genuinely a really, it's not one that I had necessarily thought of, to be honest. And I think it just goes to add on to the quite complex layer of issues that corporate entities and sites have to consider when they are asking this question as how they get more women into poker and how they make it more attractive to them. Going forward a little bit, Cara, David Lappin's put in the chat box. I thought Rebecca spoke superbly on the things Flutter were doing on diversity inclusion. Very much agree with that, David. Can you please ask Cara about corporate culture shifts over her career with 888, ESPN, and others? There you go. The floor is yours. What a question.
Interesting question, David. Well, there definitely have been corporate shifts. I've worked with and for as kind of either a brand ambassador, or I've hosted shows for pretty much all of the major companies outside of GG because they're newer. And I have definitely seen a massive culture shift in terms of from the top down. I used to work a lot in Europe and in England with a couple of different companies there, and I would run into all kinds of trouble with players and would not feel backed up at all in any kind of way. That is not the case anymore, and I'm very grateful for that. Yeah, I think at 888, we have half of our team at the least has kind of been, since I've been there, has always been women. So our ambassador team has always had a much larger presence of women than some of the other companies. And that for me has been something I've really enjoyed, that kind of support, but also just knowing that they valued women's voices. So yeah, and the money being put into ladies events and the extra things being put on top of them, like packages to main events as well as the prize pool, all of that. And it's nice to be able to see that shift happening. When I came to 888, that's something I really appreciated. Yeah, and again at ESPN, I've been through it for a very long time and seeing where once upon a time, and I'm not saying this is ESPN, but once upon a time, being told that it just wouldn't work to have me and Maria Ho at a desk together alone because people wouldn't really give us that kind of respect. They'd be wondering why two women were talking about poker. And now we do that with ESPN and with Poker Central, and it's just done. And I love that. And we used to talk about it as well and be like, one day they're going to let us do a show together. And then all of a sudden they did. So yeah, it's great to be able to see that change and that shift actually happening.
Yeah. Do you feel that, Robbie? Does that make, I mean, obviously you're a strong advocate for women's rights as well, so I expect I will know what the answer to this is, but that's kind of disheartening to think that because of our gender that you would put audiences off from seeing that. And I give an example of this outside of poker just to reinforce Cara's view that this isn't just a poker problem. I host a soccer for you, Premier League podcast, and it's been going for nearly 10 years. And I took over as full-time editor and host of it probably 5 years ago, but I've been involved the whole 10 years. And as soon as I took over as full-time host, our viewing numbers dropped by half. And the abuse started of,
Wow.
why would I want to, the women don't know anything about football. So from your perspective, Robbie, surely it makes no difference from a poker perspective, which isn't gender specific, to have, Cara and Maria on an anchor rather than two men. Surely it's fine.
Yeah, of course it's fine. I don't feel like there's any difference whatsoever, so long as the individual is qualified. It doesn't matter if you're from Mars, if you're purple, green, blue, black, woman, man, it doesn't matter. If you're qualified to do it, then yeah, why not put this person on television, put two women together, why not? What I will say, kind of slightly off on not exactly a tangent, but important to also point out, because you said that this is an issue which really does kind of transcend poker, it made me that much more happy that we were able to get this collection of women from all the different companies. We had Poker Stars, GG, WPT, the Malta Poker Festival, Kara, of course, with 888, and the World Series as well. You don't really see it that often in our industry, and that's why I feel, again, an honor and a privilege to have hosted something like this, to bring them together. We do need to hear each other. We need to hear each other's voices, grow from each other, and take each other's ideas and run with them. Very, very much so, because it is something that, again, an issue that transcends transcends the industry, and we all need to be promoting women in poker, irrespective of who's paying, which brand is paying the bills, who's sponsoring you or whatever. And, I'm just really happy to see that.
Can I just say something as well? I appreciate what you're saying. Absolutely. I think the fact that a lot of people would look at, maybe not as much now, but say 5 years ago or 10 years ago, they would have looked at two women talking about poker and they would have assumed automatically that they weren't qualified. And so when we say, as long as they're qualified, that's great. We have to remember that for some people, just seeing that they're there and there's not a man there, they're not going to assume, like Natalie is saying with your football podcast. That's a really great example of that. There's just an automatic assumption of a lack of qualification, and that's something that people have to fight against. And I think we need to remember that sometimes we need to widen the scope of what we think qualified means, so that we can actually see people who have a really good point of view and have a lot of good things to say and talent, and promote those people up.
And didn't Yvonne touch on this as well in episode 9, when she talked about there's a resistance to women for going for certain jobs, that because the job description says that there is, well, I can't do that, so I won't go for that job. Whereas the male equivalent will say, well, I haven't got X, Y, and Z, but I'm just going to wing it in the interview, and it's fine. I've got to say, Cara, I think for if I represent the recreational player, I represent the female player who will use annual leave allowance to go out and try and play European tournaments and go out to Vegas in the summer, etc. To me, it's so incredibly important to see your likes of yourself and Maria on the anchor of these shows and just talking just absolutely top of your field expertise, because to me it gives me confidence that the institutions that are running our game are paying attention to this, and they are not necessarily being swayed by a cross-section of society who deems that to be unacceptable. And I think that's really important for the powers that be, that they do buy into this. One quick one. I'm very conscious I'm not really sure whether we're going to be running out of time soon, Cara. So I want to just get a couple more to you before we let you go. Sure. One of the ones was Maureen put in the chat box earlier on. And I want to pick up on this because it's a slightly interesting point that Lynn and Martin put on the show. Maureen asked, were those numbers live versus online public? So what she wants to know is what is the difference between the percentage of female players who play live as opposed to online? And I don't know if you have any insight you can share with that for us. And I do have a follow-up question after this.
I've actually been looking at these numbers myself, and I have the same ones that everyone else does, and I'm getting them from kind of public areas. And I wish I knew the methodology behind it so that I understood it, because I'm desperate to understand what the percentages of players live that are women versus online. And if they're telling me it's 30% of online pools are female, then I believe that, absolutely. I don't know where the methodology is, though, and how they came up with those numbers. I wish I did.
Yeah. Well, I think I'm just going to follow up on that question then, Cara. One of the things that I was genuinely flabbergasted with, and when Lynn Martin said on the show that their viewing figures for the WPT, now bearing in mind how smaller field the demographic of live female players is, she said that their viewing figures was between 25 and 35% of women watch the show.
Yeah.
Now that is incredible. And that just shows to me that the women out there are interested in poker. Mm-hmm. They find it fascinating. It's entertaining to them. And I feel like when I read that, I went all the way back full circle again, back to the beginning, and went, oh, so the question is, how do we get women back into poker? It feels like every time, and I've got some sympathy for a lot of people who are trying their best to change this, but it feels sometimes like it's an impossible hurdle to overcome. But were you shocked by those figures, and could you offer any explanation as to why that's so big a gap?
The gap just, I think it is societal. I think, women aren't poker has never been considered a women's game. It's always been considered a men's game. And I think kind of coming back from that is taking us decades. And I think the marketing, if you're looking back 10 to 15 years, the marketing for poker, a lot of it, at least in Europe and in England where I was spokesmodels, mostly naked with chips over their chest, lying on poker tables. Or if we're at the World Series and they were having the fair that they had during the World Series as well with all the different poker companies, there'd be like pillow fights from the Sapphire Strip Club in a big ring or something. Or like one of the major publications' yearly party would be at a strip club. Like it wasn't, I don't know. So maybe the live arena was marketed so heavily towards men rather than being a gender neutral marketing, which is what I would advocate for, because I don't think women want pink and fluffy. I think we just all want to play the game we love. And so if we can steer away from this like heavily gendered marketing, I think that would be much, much better. But there are women who've been, at the forefront of this for so long. Linda Johnson and Jan Fisher, Lupe Soto, who, if I was going to pick someone who needs to get more attention, I think it was like 4 years ago, I was asked on ESPN during the World Series, my tips for like who keeps getting missed out for the Poker Hall of Fame. And I said, Lupe Soto her name should be up there. She's the founder of the Ladies International Poker series. She's also the president of the Women's Poker Association. She's done huge amounts of work for, decades, and she should be recognized for that. The Women in Poker Hall of Fame as well. Like that's, we need to be making sure that people see people like her who've been putting all of that work into it. And so they feel represented. I mean, she's done so much for trying to pull in, older players, both male and female, and she should be recognized for that. And instead we get people like Dan Bilzerian not even getting a slap on the wrist, as far as I saw. Like maybe he did and I just didn't see it. But I think if we're going to be lauding people who do the things that he's doing and say the things that he's saying, and it doesn't even affect their sponsorship, then that's not okay. When someone like Vanessa Cade comes along and calls him out, is she patched? Like she's never had a problem discussing sexism and misogyny, and I'm pretty sure she doesn't wear a patch, whereas the people she tends to call out do have patches. And there's a huge double standard in that, because she's like a ferociously good poker player. She's really hardworking, and she would be an asset to any team, I think. Ebony Kenny has just been finally kind of patched, and I think that was a long time coming. Yes. She's a great poker player. She's a fantastic streamer. She's got this kind of kind generosity about her that's also just like ferociously fun. And these are the people that I think need to be highlighted more. We need to be looking at these people instead of just kind of the same usual roundup of faces, mine included.
Oh no, you have to stay around. That's you can't say that. I'm not having that. I've got to say, I think I'm glad you mentioned it, because it does feel a little bit like people are tiptoeing a bit around this subject at the moment, and I'm going to face it head on. I was hugely disappointed with Dan Bilzerian being appointed as a GG ambassador, and I was really disappointed with them as a brand, that they would take that, for me, step backwards. Dive has been given a fantastic opportunity to go into that brand now and to educate and to make a change from within. Diva's a very smart lady and she knows what she's doing and she's very strong in what she stands up for. So I give her my full backing and trust that she will do this properly. I guess for me, the biggest challenge she's going to face is for all the good that she will do and the change, the diversity she will bring to GG Poker, the very next time that her fellow ambassador posts a social media post of naked women with guns and drugs and money all over their naked bodies undermines everything that she's done. And that's a challenge, and that's going to be a challenge for a long time. Robbie, I think let's bring you in on this. I think you had there's a couple of questions actually in the chat box that that follow up on this as well, but obviously this is provoking quite strong opinions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say, I imagine, I've got a lot of colleagues in the media as well. My role as the host of this show is not necessarily, not the Orbit Extra, but the Orbit itself. Especially this one that we themed, it was to highlight women in poker on International Women's Day. I did mention, you can't not mention that elephant in the room about Bilzerian. We did give Diva the opportunity to address the question head on, and she chose to give what I believe was a very classy response. I didn't want to make this a one-issue show. I didn't want it to take over and be the only thing that people are going to talk about. Twitter is very into, we want blood. We want now. We want them, go ahead and just, trash this guy. And perhaps that's warranted. I'm not a big fan. And, on my website, cardplayerlifestyle.com, the man gets zero coverage. When on my Twitter stream, I don't talk about him. I don't promote it. And unfortunately, very unfortunately, the attention that he attracts, it almost kind of like serves that cause. My view is ignore it. And, someone who's brand new as an ambassador to a company, first thing you do is you can't get in there and just go ahead and trash another ambassador. As a poker player, I know enough, even as a recreational, that you're not supposed to get yourself into tough spots. Unfortunately, it's a very tough spot that Diva found herself in right away. I don't believe there is any sort of GTO response, but I think the best thing that she could do, she absolutely did. She's there not to trash other people, but to go ahead and promote positivity for women in poker, exactly the type of thing that she's doing. And I would just say, who needs to check themselves is GG, not necessarily Diva. You can't go ahead and respond on behalf of an entire company, even though you're an ambassador for them. Internal conversations are what need to take place. Here, we have an opportunity to talk about it, react in a live setting. I said what I basically had to say, and quite frankly, again, I can't fault Diva for anything that she said. Some people may want that more blood, and maybe we'll just keep talking about it on Twitter a little bit more. I'm perfectly happy, said what I had to say about that gentleman, and let's move on to the next topic and not give him any more attention that he doesn't deserve already.
Yeah, I do agree with that, but I'm going to follow up with one more because I just think I don't want to leave this carrying on being the elephant in the room. I want to address this head on. And David Lappin actually has put in the chat box as well, Cara, and I would just want to get your final thoughts on this before we move on. He said Diva filibustered the Bilzerian question slightly, leaving a bit of an elephant in the room afterwards. Now, given that the hashtag for International Women's Day this year is choose to challenge, isn't it problematic that far from challenging, it seems that there's an attempt to ignore? And that's, I guess, both directly to Bilzerian and the furore that surrounds it.
I think it's a difficult situation to navigate. I think the first thing I'll say is that Diva is not responsible for Dan Bilzerian. GG is, because he's their ambassador.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, like a lot of people, I wish I'd been a fly on the wall to understand what her discussion with them going into this was like, because I would have serious concerns that she's being used as like a cover for things that he might again say in the future, and to make it seem like they're a lot more friendly towards women. But if you do retain someone who, who routinely says very misogynistic things, then I don't know. I am just really skeptical, I guess, about the entire situation. And I hope that she's able to do really good things with their money. But, because I think that would be great for women in poker. But I also don't think it's fair to put it on her shoulders that it's her job to do the challenging and to do it publicly on a podcast where everyone can go back and post clips of it, and then it becomes her issue.
Context. Yeah,
well,
absolutely.
and maybe it would be completely in context, but it's also not fair to make her the punching bag for that. I think, a lot of people need to be able to talk about it, and it can't always be women trying to solve women's issues. Obviously we need to, but if we're also the ones who are going to be more highly criticized for certain things, then, we need other people also to step up. So yeah, I mean, I would have loved to have a conversation with her about it and understand all of it, because, we all have to make our own choices. And I get that. I hope she's able to do good work with it.
Yeah, I think she will. And I think from my perspective, I mean, I really wanted to address this, and I'm glad we got the opportunity. But what I would say is I do trust her, and I trust her judgment impeccably. And I back her, whatever she chooses to do with this. So let's see how this unfolds. Sorry, Robbie, you had a quick point on that?
I did just want to say one more thing as well. Yes, it does. Again, just to sort of follow up on my own point that I was making, and again, shout out to Jennifer Newell. She's just like, yeah, it has to be addressed. Shitty behavior. Yes, I agree, and it is important to be discussing it. But I almost say again, like to Kara's point exactly. This is a podcast. The Orbit. This is the show. People are going to look back at it in a month, 6 months, 1 year's time. We try to create something which is kind of evergreen. Of course, we want the women's issue to progress and get better at it. But people are going to look back at it, and again, in my role as the host of the show, if the one thing people are taking out of an entire 75-minute show, Diver didn't address the Bilzerian thing, I almost say I failed as a host, because we wanted to do so much more and focus on so many more broader and equally as important topics. So it did have to be addressed. I'm happy we did talk about it for the amount we did. Kudos to Diva for the classy response, but that's all the attention I'm personally prepared to give to it. And I do think that you have other people in the chat box who have other questions as well.
Let's move on, Robbie.
On this stuff too.
Yeah, sure. Let's finish off with one final question for Cara before we let her go. We're dominating her time.
I've enjoyed it, so that's all good.
Good.
Thank you.
Do you want to pick out one final question then in chat box, Robbie, and we'll pass it to Cara? I think there was one.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so we've got Alexandra O'Brien. So
Alex.
Thanks so much, Alex, for commenting here. One of the panelists was highlighting the lack of actions towards players that are aggressive towards female players. So it isn't just about promoting women in poker, but getting women to the tables in the first place. It seems that it remains a hard sell to attract female players when the poker room is seen as a hostile arena. Should there be an industry-wide review of conduct and what poker room managers can and should be doing? It's an excellent question.
It is, and I'm not surprised, because Alex O'Brien actually, not to mention Dan Bilzerian again, but she actually won the free roll on GG, and now we'll be heads up. She's a science writer, a great poker player, and extremely smart. And I'm biased because she's a friend, but there you go. So I do actually think that there should be an industry-wide standard. And one of the reasons, and I should have mentioned this before, why I brought up Lupe Soto, is that she's kind of spearheading this, I think it's called Raise It Up. I was looking at it. Yeah, the Raise It Up initiative. They're trying to go to poker rooms and tours as well, I would imagine, and get them to sign like this code of conduct. But not only that, but to give them training and educational support so that, dealers and staff know what they're looking for. Because it can't always be on the player themselves to kind of put their hand up and go, help, I'm being harassed. Because that's just not going to happen a lot of the time. People aren't going to say that. You're trying to low profile it and just kind of power through. So people have to be able to see that. The floor staff have to be able to see it. The dealers have to see it. And so, yeah, I think that this Raise It Up initiative that Lupe is kind of pushing forward is a really great one. And I hope that more poker rooms take a look at it and get the kind of education and training for their staff so that they're able to spot, different kinds of harassment or bad behavior at the table, so that we make it a more welcoming environment. So that if, women come to be on the rail, or if they're there at the casino for some other reason and they see poker, they're not going to walk into a situation and go, oh yeah, I would not want to sit down here. They're going to be like, oh, that looks great. That looks just like the poker we see on TV, which is friendly and exciting and competitive and all of those things. So yeah, I think so.
Excellent. Well, we've got one final question for you, Cara, and then we're going to wrap up this very first maiden voyage of the Orbit Extra. Comment from our very own Lee Wiltshire, who says, Diver mentioned in the show itself that we needed a moneymaker moment for women in poker, and then the boom will follow. But he quite rightly points out, if Vicky Cora Mitchell winning 2 EPTs wasn't that moneymaker moment, then what is it going to take to make the boom?
That's a really good question, because that was a spectacular moment for poker history. Even across the pond, if we're, talking about North America, that's still 2 EPT titles is like, that was, trailblazing. So I don't know. I think we do need to have a woman at the final table of the World Series of Poker main event. And I think the year that we almost had 2 there and then they both bubbled was just super painful for them, most of all, but also for us in the coverage. I think we do need that. I think having more TV time, is really important, and having more media and press attention is really important. And Maria Ho does a lot of really great press in the States, and she's exceptional at promoting poker as this, fantastic game that you can play and isn't, just for guys.
Excellent. What a great answer. Apologies for slight technical error then. I'm not really sure what happened. I
was talking too much. I understand. It happens all the time.
I think that
playing me off. I know how this goes.
That was the lights on moment at the end of a club where Des in the background saying, come on, off you go. Well, I think that's quite a good timing to say. That has actually come to the end of our session. This has been our maiden voyage of the Orbit Extra, and it has been an absolute pleasure to debate and discuss everything that's come out of that fantastic Women's Day edition of the Orbit episode 9. Thanks, of course, to the whole Orbit team, to Yvonne, to Lynn, to Diver, and to Yvonne. Thank you. I've got them in the right order. Rebecca, that's the one. Sorry, I said one twice. I knew it was in my brain. Just for giving up their time to produce that fantastic content. Cara, for supporting the Orbit Extra and for joining us tonight. Thank you so much. Your insight has been fantastic. We will be back the next time the Orbit is published for episode 10. So do keep an eye on social media. We will let you know when the Orbit Extra will be around. If you've got any feedback, any comments, suggestions, anything you want to see us do in the Orbit Extra, or anything you want to change or add on or to make it even more exciting, we are all ears. This show is all about you, and we want you to become involved. I've been your host, Natalie Bromley. This has been the Orbit Extra. Until next time.
Wow. I still see you, right? Can you hear me? Can you guys